the only topic on the agenda is the cost of service study. Finance Committee will recall that we talked about this several weeks ago, was it 3 weeks ago, something like that?
Yeah, the 29th.
So this is kind of an update and kind of tell you where we're heading. So we want to let you know that we certainly listened to the feedback that we had at the last one, and we want to present some options. We're still trying to schedule a workshop. It's just been difficult with schedules. We're tentatively looking at the 9th, December 9th, Wes, to do a workshop, a full board workshop. We need to make sure that's all the board members can attend. And we'll do a similar presentation there where we'll go through some of the options, some of the history and background, purpose of a cost of service study, and we're still having little problems here, but I guess just as some of the background, we can tell you, just because you do a cost of service study doesn't mean you have to raise rates. Part of the reason you do a cost of service study is to make sure that the costs are being allocated correctly. If you did want to use rates, you have to go through a cost of service study. You have to make sure that that's your foundational document. So, so while we bring this up, so one of the options you're going to hear is that we think that some of the complexities in the cost of service study would require that it be delayed beyond where we thought we were going to be. So the full cost of service study, which we've embarked on, will probably be reflected in the 2021 timeframe. But we have some options to consider concurrently while we do that. So having said all that, we'll get into touch base on a few of those items as we go through the presentation. But I think, Mike, were you going to jump in, or?
I think we're going to start out with Wes, right?
So that was the first bullet point. That was the background. So now we're going to move on to some scenarios, which Mike is going to talk about. So we're going to go through the whole thing.
Go through the agenda.
The background and the scenarios that we'll present to you, and then we're going to look at the effect on the reserves of those scenarios.
Because that's been an important component to the Finance Committee, is if we did whatever option we choose, what impacts does that have on our reserves?
So where are the reserve levels in relation to the floor and the ceiling? How does it affect our days in cash? What effect might that have on our rating criteria? Those are all important things to consider. And after that, we'll take a look at an estimated bill in presenting these options. And then finally, we'll have the schedule or the preliminary calendar that we can potentially move forward with.
Yeah, because each of the options has a slightly different schedule on implementation dates.
Okay.
So the schedule is on if we need a joint team process or not.
Yes,
If
true.
we need one, it's gonna show,
Right.
determine what the schedule should
If
be.
we don't need one, there doesn't
We
have
don't
to be a
want
schedule.
one. That would be a lovely thing.
So just as a reminder, the rates that we have in place now don't expire. They just can't be increased
Yep.
without
Right.
going through another
But if
process.
everything
So
remained the same.
they could stay the same, and we'll show you the impacts of keeping it the same, even in the short term, what it has on future rate increase requirements and reserve levels. So Mike's gonna jump in.
So just real quick, this shows our current fiscal year budgeted revenues and then our projected for the next 5 years. So we talked about during the budget process and during the previous cost of service study that what was in the current budget, and we've always said it was a 3.5% to 4% increase. So for this fiscal year 1920, which is the one we're currently in, it was projected that a 3.5% increase would go into effect January 1st, 2020.
And the 5-year revenue on that would be $245 million.
So what I wanted to show real quick, just the next slide, is because it doesn't look like a 3.5% increase. This looks like a 20% increase. It's all on the scaling. So if you see that the beginning starts at 40 million, goes up to 55 million. I just wanted to show you real quick, if we did it in true scaling, that's what the revenues increase looks like. So I just didn't want you to see, when I first see this, it looks like a 15-20% increase every year. So we did this to, my eyes are old, expand it so we can see a little bit more clarity.
What's the green says no increase in 2020?
We'll get to that.
So,
It's animated. We'll bring in different lines as we go forward.
so you're telling me just in fiscal year 1920, it's a $45 million. The 3.5% represents $45 million.
No, that's the total revenues.
Oh, total revenue.
Total.
Yeah.
For the full
Water.
5-year budget.
A 3.5% rate increase on January 1 of 2020 would have led to about a $46
Six-ish.
million annual revenue from the water side of things.
A total. Not,
total.
not an.
Not an
okay.
increase.
Not additional,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
No, that'd be a big water company.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the blue line,
That's what
the
I was
blue
saying.
line is
I
the
thought it was
total
total.
revenue, and the little numbers on there, just shows what percent rate increase leads to that.
And I know this is gonna be a silly question, but the blue shading, is that just to show like it's water?
Yes.
Initially, but then now put in other colors. I always start blue with water and green
Oh, I
with
know we
sewer.
ran
but
out
I
of
would
water
put
up
it-
there, it's like, did we run out of water? Okay,
Oh, that's our, yeah.
alright.
So then I'll turn it over to Glenn and just to remember that, we'll go back again, that's our revenue numbers. It's also our expenditures, our budgeted expenditures.
Yeah, ideally, when we go through the budget process, we try to match our revenues and expenditures directly. So the blue line you're showing is it's both. It's in the budget, this is what we thought we would need, and this is how much we would generate through rates.
But does it show, for instance, last year, we projected how much we needed, did we actually need that much?
We had we had a delta in a positive,
3%.
we call it a positive variance. We
Oh,
generated more revenue than we spent. That's
Okay.
what you're asking.
Yes,
Yes.
so you have a tendency,
Well, one
Budget
thing,
that.
and I think Glenn said this best, one thing we can guarantee about the budget process is there will always be wrong. You just try to be as close as you can.
right,
So, and we
as
actually
close as you can, but we don't always have to be extra,
No. And we're not always extra.
you know?
No, and when we do the budget actual every year, when we start the budget process, we show.
More times than not, though, I think there's
True.
a positive variance.
Right, it's more often positive than negative, but it has been negative in the past. So, why don't you go ahead and click it, Mike?
No.
So, Director Martin asked the question, what happens, what is the green thing? So the green text, and the third row of that chart at the bottom says no increase in 2020 and a permanent one-year delay. What that means is, if the board decided not to increase rates on January 1, keep them the same way they are, but then in the future, we would increase rates by the same percentage that we had projected before, what would be the impact be? So you can see that the numbers that Mike was just pointing out, they're the same increase in future years. So the only thing we changed is to hold off on a rate increase on January 1 of
Oops.
2020. Go back
I
one.
know, sorry.
That ruins the whole mojo.
Can't click.
So what this shows is if you delay by 1 year, every year afterwards, you're kind of behind the curve, and you're always behind the curve. So if you look at that far right column there, Mike, the 1.9, what that shows you, an ongoing shortfall in every year afterwards, the impact of having a 0% rate increase in the first year and not doing accelerated rate increases in subsequent years, you have $2 million less revenue per year, not just 1 year, per year. So if you wanted to close the gap, you could take money from the reserves to backfill that shortfall, but then you're gonna have to do it in every year. So if you look in that column that says 5-year shortfall, at the end of 5 years, you'll be almost $8 million in the hole because of that one action. And every year thereafter, almost another $2 million in the hole.
Well, and that's assuming that all your assumptions are correct on the rate
Absolutely.
increases.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so many assumptions in a budget document.
Right.
You know, and like Wes said, they're always wrong. and
But
you
over,
just hope
but
you're as
over,
close
but
as-
over 5 years, it's 7.8, almost 7.9 million. It's not crazy, especially considering how close to our ceiling we are.
We'll show you
Yeah.
that in a second. So if there's no questions on that, we'll talk about. So our goal, before Mike clicks it, the goal is to try to get on that blue line, because that's where your revenues match your expenses, and you don't rely on ongoing, continual transfers from the reserves to cover your shortfall. So the question now is, how do you get back onto that blue line? If we were to have a no rate increase on January 1 of 2020, go ahead and click it, Mike. If you wanted to say, okay, 0 rate increase in 2020, but in 2021, January 2021, what would we have to do with rates to get back onto that blue line? And what this shows is you'd have to have a 7.35% rate increase in that second year to get on the same blue line that you would have otherwise been on by doing 3.5 on January 1 of 2020 and then a 3.61% on January 1, 2021. So that means in the first year, you'd have an $830,000 shortfall. So you could take $830,000 from the reserves to backfill that revenue shortfall, balance the books, and then in subsequent years, you wouldn't have an ongoing shortfall because you would have taken the step to increase rates in an accelerated fashion, we'll call it. Now, I don't know if Mike showed it or not, but you don't necessarily have to do that in 1 year. You could say, well, maybe we did it over 2 years and we'd flatten that curve, so maybe you'd catch up by 21, 22. You wouldn't have to be up at 7%, but you'd probably be in the 5% or so, and then you'd catch up, but then your shortfall would increase too. You'd have to,
Okay, maybe I'm just thick, but, and maybe my mind just doesn't wrap around this that way. But I'm looking at it, that 3.5% increase. Okay, you don't have that increase, but you take that 3.5% out of reserves and put it in there. So, who pays for that 3.5% is immaterial. Well, you have an increase of 3.5% happening this year. It just came out of reserves.
Yeah, but what they're saying is every year thereafter, it would have been in year 2, it would have been 7%, but now it's just 3%. So every year you're still missing that 3.5% every year.
That's cumulative.
that 1 year adds up. So every year, you are now, Director Martin, you would now be on the green line. And that green line is $2 million below the blue line. So you've set up a revenue scheme, a revenue generation plan that is $2 million underfunded. So the only way to close that on an annual basis is by looking to the reserves annually, not a one
Not
time.
the only way. I mean, we can.
Well, there's other
You're
ways.
trying to get us to the blue line. Why don't we try to get to the green line?
By cost cutting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can look at that, but what we're saying.
I mean, my company's telling me to do it right now as we speak, as we do our budget.
Right.
So why can't we?
What we're showing you is the approved budget. When the board approved the budget in the long-term projection, that's the numbers that were in there. So that's the basis of everything we're presenting now, is that's what we proposed to the board, and that's what we're shooting for. And what we're trying to analyze through this process, the cost of service process, is what are the impacts of not increasing rates now? So we have one more alternative, right? One more option, which would be, what if we wanted to do something
Split the difference.
like split the difference in year 1, so in 2020, is there a rate increase we can put, and here we just came up with 2%, it's about half the way between 0 and 3.5, we just picked 2%, and what is the impact of that? So if you did that, to get back on the blue line, you'd have to raise the second year, you'd have to go up to 5.17%, and now you're on the blue line revenue generation, and the impact on the reserves from that is $390,000. One time, transfer $390,000 from reserves to recover any revenue shortfall. Now, to Director Sinella and Martin's comment, if at the end of the first year, we find out that we overestimated our expenses and we came in below, you're not committed to that percent generation. You can say, oh, it looks like we don't need that much, or we don't have to transfer that much from reserves. We would check in every year and say, okay, where do we need to be? But when you take these long-term, these 5-year projections, you have to base it on some certain assumptions, and what we based it on is the information that was contained in the approved budget. So,
Well, and I know, and this is a problem I've had since I've been here with the approved budget. But the approved budget was based on numbers that you gave us, but could be changed at any time by the same board. I mean, we approve a budget before we have all the facts. Now that we're getting the facts, we stand on, well, you approved the budget. Well, yeah, we didn't have all the facts we're getting now. So with all the facts we're getting now, maybe we need to change that budget. So I'm trying to figure out why we don't do it all at one time. It's like, because otherwise we fall back on, you have an approved budget. Well, why did we approve that budget? We made certain assumptions that it was gonna come out all right, and now it's not, in my mind. So therefore, we have to cut things on the budget.
No, nothing has changed, and it came out all right, and we are actually, I believe we need to stay on the blue line in order to meet our budget requirements, in order to operate efficiently and in accordance with our budget as it's presented. And the reasoning for the budget, remember, was rating criteria, healthy reserves. There's several reasons why we've actually got the budget where it is, and we don't budget for anything in excess. Everything we bring to you is down to the $100 line item that we need to operate efficiently and to provide sustainable water to our customers and reliable water to our customers.
and that's why in the finance committee, we've taken the time to go line by line in the budget to show you where all the numbers come from, and there's not a lot of fat in there. One of the biggest unknowns is water. How much water are we gonna buy?
Right.
We make an estimation and we have almost zero control over what the people use. If we sell less water, we also have to purchase less water, so it's somewhat self-correcting, but overall, it'll change.
It's a loss. That's all
Yeah,
right.
so we go by our best estimations based on past history and projections and what is regulation gonna force us into. We look at a lot of factors, but then we come up with not just a 1 year, we look at a 5-year plan, and that's what you see.
And real quick, sorry, out of that $46 million budget, about 2/3 of it is water purchases, which we have no control over.
Well, that's just the water purchases, not necessarily the ready to serve either, and those are fixed costs. So
Right.
I think our water costs are 75% of
About
our
75,
total.
yeah,
Yeah.
3/4.
So that's not controllable, and most of that is affected by pass-through costs from the water authority.
And right now, the increase from last fiscal year to this fiscal year of just SCC, San Diego County Water Authority, that includes desal, so everything, all in, was about 4.7%. So, just doing nothing, if everything stayed the same, our water costs, which are 75%, which was said, went up 4.7%.
And it's difficult to absorb that.
Yeah. So is the next slide the
Oh.
Next
reserve
slide.
impacts?
Yeah, I think we get into the reserves next. So if we do these scenarios, first, I'll show you, this is the budget. You've seen this slide before. This was presented mainly in presenting the UAL pay down options. So you can see the water and wastewater replacement reserve balances. And one thing I'd like to point out is that although in 19 we are healthy, we're close to the ceiling. Same thing here with wastewater. Because of the UAL pay down and other capital projects that we have, you can see that these replacement reserves are actually dipping down towards the floor. So you end up with around 20 million here, and the floor is 10 million. Same thing with sewer, and sewer is actually worse because we have a lot of sewer projects coming up. So we're ending up down towards 20 versus 10. It's about the same, but still we're well below the ceiling, which is only 8 years of capital replacement and 10 years of capital replacement for water. So while they appear healthy in 19, based on our 5-year forecast, they're trending downward.
And that 5-year forecast assume those rate increases every year, the 3.5% to 4% every year.
Right, so these have that built in, and you're still seeing a downward trend, and we're still actually closer to the floor than we are the ceiling in the future years. Also, it's important to remember that, for us to maintain our rating criteria, which affects our ability to issue debt, which is a big thing. If we run into the need to replace capital assets and we can't issue debt, we could be in a lot of trouble. And also, if we come close to the floor, we either raise rates or we issue debt. If we can't issue debt, then we have no choice but to raise rates. Our policy says this is our floor and we have to maintain this amount of money in there. So getting closer to that is not a good thing.
Well, the water replacement, you're right in the middle, it looks like, from the chart.
Yes, with the rate
Right-
increases.
Right in the middle where you're supposed to be, with the rate
With
increases.
rate increase, right.
And with the sewer, you're dropping down, but is that including, again, the parallel line?
Yes.
Obviously, that's where all that expense is, because I don't see it anyplace else in.
Well, yeah, but the outfall is mostly capacity. Capacity is paid for through debt. And these are just the replacement reserves. These are not the capacity reserves. So
But there's a
that's
portion
also-
of the outfall that may have been replacement funded.
yeah, there may have been a percentage of it.
And that's also paying EWA's
Yep,
Yes.
pension and.
all
yeah.
that's in there.
But we can't do anything about that.
Right, it is what it is,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
So this, again, just before Wes clicks the button, this shows assuming the rate increases that were included in the budget.
And this
And is
is
this
basically-
assuming the PERS payoff
Yes.
Yes, that's built in.
as the 2-year payoff?
Well,
Three.
we did want, yeah, we may do it in 2 years, the board, so they made a decision to pay about half of it. And next year, we'll be asking the board, do you wanna pay off the rest of it, or do it over the 2 years that are remaining in the 3-year?
Yeah, so this right here,
So those numbers are including all of that?
They're all in there.
and the $8 million has gone out, so this right here has happened. This has gone down to here.
Okay,
So moving forward is what we're kind of looking at now. So this being said, this is with the approved budget. If we look at, say there was no rate increase and the impact of that no rate increase at all over the next 5 years.
If you remember that green line where we took a 1-year hiatus and then went back on the revenue to the others, that green line, that's what you're seeing now, the impacts of that green line on the reserves.
Which is this here, so it's $1.9 million and $8 million total over the 5 years. So here's the approved budget. Now keep your eye on this and the days in cash here. These are the important things to remember. And remember that our baseline for the days in cash, based on what our financial advisor told us and Fitch rating, we want to keep that above 300. So if we look at this, first of all, the water replacement reserves goes much lower here. It was trending up before a little bit, got closer to 20. Now we're looking at about 16 to 17 million versus 10 million here in water.
5 years from now.
5 years from now, yeah. But it's coming much closer to the floor. And you can see here, it's combined reserves. This is our ceiling, or here, which is actually closer to the floor. And days in cash, more importantly, goes below our baseline of 300 for 3 years out here. We've only got 2 years where we're actually good, and then we drop below it here for 3 years. So we'd have to have something to compensate for that in order to maintain our rating criteria.
So just as a reminder, our current rating criteria, we're a AA+. The board has expressed some desire to, what does it take to get to a AAA? You know, Livenhain has a AAA. The things that it takes to get there, we can't quantify exactly, but higher days in cash and willingness to approve rate increases, those are indicators that put you in the positive direction you want to go. If you don't do those things, it's going to put downward pressure. I'm not saying it's going to make you go to just a AA from a AA+, but that would be the downward pressure that those actions would take.
Right. And the difference between AA and AA+ percentage-wise?
It depends who you talk to.
Yeah, it depends who you talk to, but the
Quarter of a point.
well, based on what I've heard, it may be a quarter of a point, but more importantly, what it affects is your ability to issue debt in the future. If you have a AA+ or a AAA, you can issue debt now, you can probably issue it again in a year and the year after that. They're looking at you for your strength of your reserves, your willingness to increase rates, and your days in cash, all of that stuff together. And they're saying, wow, they're really financially healthy, we'll lend you money. And then if you come back again, they'll lend you money again. If you get downgraded and you're constantly getting downgraded, they might lend you money once, but the second time you come back, like, you're trending down. We're not gonna lend you debt again.
If you constantly, but I get it.
Well, that's what it hurts really, is your ability to issue debt in the future.
And I know the finance people wanna see us in the black line, if not higher, all the time.
Well, no.
So I get that. And I
One
understand
of the reasons finance and the general managers were trying to get you near that black line at the upper end is because we knew these things would be coming in the future. A heavy capital replacement, possibly addressing our PERS retirement. If we weren't up at the black line, we wouldn't have had the ability to take the action to address our PERS liability. If we had been at the middle, like halfway between the floor and the ceiling, we probably couldn't have recommended to the board to address the PERS UAL, which is gonna save us probably $25 million over the life of that. So
Right.
it was the right action for the board to take, and it was through previous board actions that positioned us to be able to do that.
Right.
So,
Plus, being closer to that black line actually helps us increase our reserve levels. And while water replacement reserves don't pay for capacity reserves, the total balance there does affect our days in cash and our ability to issue debt. And we need to have that ability to issue debt to pay for capacity projects.
What's the industry standard? There must be a number that's a standard.
Well, that's what we're using for our criteria.
are you talking
So-
for the reserves or days in cash?
Reserve.
Well, ours is set based on our policy, our.
We said it based on policy, but where'd that policy come from?
Well, that's the thing. Industry standards, you set your reserve limits based on your infrastructure needs.
Okay.
So we looked at our infrastructure and we said we're gonna need 3 years for the floor, 8 years for sewer for the ceiling, and 10 years for water for the ceiling. Every agency does that.
I don't think there's a standard other than the general approach, looking at your needs and looking at a range of how much money would you need for a floor and a ceiling.
Yeah.
So do we change the floor and the ceiling as we move on? Because as we move on, we've done some of that replacement already.
yeah.
There may be more replacement needs to be done,
Every year.
but
Some drops off, some new gets added on. So every year,
Right.
we're looking at that mix of what are our needs now? We forget about what we already built, but oh, look, this project's coming that we didn't plan for before. So that gets factored into the equation.
Yeah, we have the calculation looking at our future replacement needs and we take, and every year it moves
what
forward.
major replacements do you see in the future? And not the earthquake and the scare, but what's real major that we need to do other than the infrastructure we now have?
And that may be a good finance committee meeting to look at the fixed asset detail listing, and I can actually show you all of our fixed assets, the year that they were put in place, their estimated useful life, so when they're actually projected to be replaced. We have all that information, we review it,
Yeah.
like that periodically.
And it's in the budget, all that stuff's in the budget. It shows by year, how much money do we think we need based on the aging infrastructure that we already have?
So now we have a new person to assess all that, and you might not need all the nuts and bolts.
Well, that's actually part of having the new person that's good, is that we can update those numbers and make sure that they're accurate and get it, make sure that they're on point every year. We're using our best estimate based on historical costs. It may come around where we do an asset condition assessment and say, oh, you know what, this is gonna cost us this much to replace, but it's not gonna make that line go down. More than
Right.
likely, it's gonna make it go
Right.
up.
Right.
Because they're gonna say, you have it based on historical costs and you've ENR'd it, but really it's gonna cost you this much today. So 10
Yeah.
years of your assets is gonna be way up here versus down
Yeah,
here.
and here's a good example, when a developer builds a pipeline, he's building it raw land, no traffic control, and it cost him $1 million.
Right.
If we had to go replace that line, even if we replaced it the next day, it's not $1 million. It's gonna probably be double to triple that with all now you're tearing up pavement and traffic control and all this stuff. So when we look at that in the replacement policy, we look at that to say, okay, what, should we be booking what do you call it, the book value for that, what it cost when we received it, or should we be doing the actual replacement cost? And like Wes said, all those are really gonna be upward pressure on those, it's not gonna go down, so.
So we take an asset that's 20 years old when it was put in service, right? And we use the ENR for over 20 years. So if it were $100,000 20 years ago, it may have been ENR'd up to, I don't know, $1 million or whatever now. But that's just based on the ENR, which is the Engineering
News
News
Record.
Record Index. So we've got our best guess based on the ENR record. But we could have someone come out and look at it and be like, you know what, this is gonna cost you $3 million to replace, not $1 million. You've been using the ENR and that's your best guess, but and more than likely it's gonna go up rather than down.
Okay.
So, I think that being said, we can move on to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so Mike, you wanna
Oh,
talk
yeah,
about that?
so the first sorry.
Go ahead.
So this just shows our current water sewer rates. So right now, in option A is our current rates and this is your average single-family residence with a 5/8 inch meter using 13 units of water. And that's pretty much standard what all agencies use, 13 units of water a month, 5/8 inch single-family residence. So I just want to clarify that. So the water is the commodity portion of it, the 13 units. The RTS is the ready to serve, the fixed portion of it, and the sewer is the sewer service charge. So right now, your average single-family residence pays about $128 per month. The option B is just showing what's in the budget. What did we propose in the budget to bring in that revenue that we've talked about? It would go, I'm not gonna read them all together, we'll just look at the total line. It's 128 to 131. So it's really a $3.20 customer impact to your average single-family residence, which is about 2.5%. So even though we talked about a 3.5% increase, when you look at the total bill, because sewer is not projected to increase at all, it's remaining flat at the $39 per month, the average total bill would be about 2.5%. The option C is that 2%, I think it was the gray line, kind of splitting the difference. If you did a 2% increase on January 1st, 2020, the bill would go from 128 to 130, which is about $1.80 and about 1.4%. So those are the impacts on the typical customer.
And I can almost guarantee you that there's not another agency out there that's looking at less than 2.5%.
I just looked up OMWD because you said they just went to Prop 218, theirs was 9%. I just looked at Oceanside, theirs was high fours. For
Per
the same
year
time
or for
period.
multi-year?
Per year. Ramona said they just went out for a 5-year. Their board approved a 5-year rate increase. The first 4 years, they capped the maximum increase. I'm trying to remember what he said, 35% over the 4 years, over the
Whoa.
4 or 5 years. So it's like, and I was shocked. It was like 9% a year was the maximum they said. So those are just, and the 3 of them that I've heard of. I plan to do, like we would normally do, a rate comparison of all the agencies, specifically those in the North County area, but try to get all 24 agencies. Sometimes it's hard and.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry.
So I think, in the short run, I think there are some big issues that we've identified in preparing a new cost of service study that may warrant delaying a Prop 218 increase based on a new cost of service study. We have an existing model that went through a cost of service study. So when you look at these option B and option C, we believe that we can go through a Prop 218 process based on our existing cost of service and our existing model that could be done relatively quickly, and I think the next slide is the schedule, and still address our revenue issues. So, and this is kind of what, if the board wanted to go in this direction, and like I said, we're trying to schedule a workshop, tentatively scheduled for December 9th. We would present options like we did today, and we would talk about maybe bring in a draft Prop 218 notice, so the board could take a look at it. If the board liked what they saw, we would schedule a meeting for December 18th, that's the second regularly scheduled meeting in December, for the board to approve the 218 notice. And as you recall, that starts a 45-day process. So we would, if the board approved the notice on December 18th, we would then get with our mailing, what do they call it? The InfoSend, the mailing company that does it, that prints up and sends them out. And if they get them out by December 21st, they mail out the Prop 218, the 45 days, we could schedule a board meeting, the first meeting of February. And if the board conducted the public hearing and approved the rates, those rates could become effective immediately. Just like the cap fees could be effective immediately, they would become effective the next day on February 6th, and then people that got a bill March 6th or later would reflect the new rates, those low rates that we just showed. So that's what we're prepared to talk at the workshop about. This is probably the most aggressive, most optimistic schedule, but I think it's achievable. Now, if we have a workshop on the 9th and the board asks us to go look at 22 different options, we certainly can't meet that. But if the board in general was okay with one of the options that are presented, and then we think we'd have enough time to put together the actual notice and the staff report for a meeting on the 18th that would allow us to meet this February 5th deadline.
And the Prop 218 is pretty standard. This is our one from last time. There's certain requirements you have to, 90% of it is just boilerplate, and you have to include certain language and verbiage. Really, it's just updating the dates and whatever the charts they are.
I don't know what happened to them, but I got some of those at Aqua from other agencies, brought them back and gave them to the people at the time that were here. They're not here anymore. But they were so much easier to read. People could understand it. They added the gobbledygook on the back page, but on the front page and two middle pages gave you understandable language, and then whatever they require you put on the back of it. But it explained to people exactly what was
Yeah,
going
you
on.
do. I don't like our current charts and graphs and
No,
stuff,
yeah.
but I can make it much more visually appealing.
unintelligible,
Yeah.
yeah.
The other
And
thing
we had
is-
people show up last time that thought, water was going through the roof.
Yes.
And we were all getting paid $250,000 a year. All 5 board members. It's like, what? Where did you come up with those
Oh,
numbers?
I do remember that.
From
Yeah.
stuff they read.
Yeah.
They got it wrong.
It gets confusing because I know that you have to come up with some sort of average household, right? But when you talk about it, the average household's at 128. I mean, I'd like to think I'm pretty average, 2,400 square foot home, family of 3, got her mother-in-law staying with us right now while she recovers from surgery. My bill's never near 128. So if I looked at this and it said, oh, it's gonna go to 131, I'm gonna be like, well, my bill's usually around between 95 and 105, right? Depending on time of year. And so it, if you're just
Your bill is lower?
yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
The average that they say is 13, that was like 2.5 years ago, and no one's ever deviated from that. The real average in our district now is like 11.9.
Oh.
So we should use 12, but then
$5.
I would confuse you guys,
Right.
because you'd say, oh, last year was 128. If I use 12, it'll go down to 125. And you'll say, oh, our prices decreased. Well, no,
Right.
so I'm trying to keep it constant to not,
That is one thing I would like you guys to look into for us is how do other districts, I understand the requirement and I want to be as transparent as we possibly can through anything that we do. But what are some of the best practices out there for articulating this type of information to customers to where they can really understand the actual impact, and just so it's clear but not confusing, so we don't have people coming to the board meeting saying that, well, the board members are making $250,000 a year and it's going up
Yeah.
30% and all this stuff, because because in reality, a 2.49% increase based off of the fact that, you know, unless we got to the point where there was such an extreme situation where we were freezing salaries and all that stuff, and I don't think we're there, not even close. But we don't have a lot of other than labor and water. We have no; those are your biggest chunks, right? And we don't have any control of the water.
Right.
We do have control over the labor, but I think it's to keep the district healthy, sustainable, and all the things that Wes had mentioned earlier. I don't think that's wise to do either. So, and I don't think 2.49% is necessarily an unreasonable increase.
But
But I-
option C looks good.
Well, you know, there's stuff to think about, but I you know, so just see what you guys can find out there as far as best practices, and I'd be kind of
Yeah,
curious.
we
to
can
see what's
certainly
out
look,
there.
you know, you guys have both made the comment about the $250,000. I don't think there's anything in our previous 218 that was just somebody making stuff up. There's
Yeah.
nothing in there that people could read it and say, wow, all the directors are making and all the staff are making
Right.
$250,000.
Right, but it just has to be easy to read, that's all,
Yeah.
to understand.
And-
What is option C? Did you show us a chart, what happens if we do option C?
Yeah, that's the, go ahead, you can go back. to
I'm
that.
hitting my computer.
Yeah.
We don't, but Wes, I think it was, you
Yeah.
said it was 5 days in
Well,
cash.
Oh, are you talking about on the rate side or on the reserve
Well,
side?
show them the rate side real quick.
On the right side.
On
The-
this, of this
No,
one?
no, no, at the
Back
very
at the
beginning,
beginning.
Oh.
the gray line, Mike.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
So-
yeah, it's the middle line.
You see on the far left it says 2%,
Yeah.
that gray line, that's if you did 2% around January 1st, you'd have to draw about $390,000 from reserves.
Right?
And then in the next year, you'd have to go up about a 5.17% increase to get you back on that blue line. That
But
we
you show a 1.4% one on that chart. Option C, option B.
Oh,
option
okay,
Okay,
so,
That's because the
show us
two-
the
yeah,
option.
so the
2%.
2% is 2% on the two blue lines on the water. So it's taking this, it's taking this 5416, adding 2%,
okay,
taking this
that's what I'm
3532, adding 2%.
I'm
but
looking
this-
at the overall percentage.
Yeah, the
rate,
sewer
that's what I'm doing.
percentage is 0. So when you look at the total all-in cost for the 2%, because sewer is staying at 0, it's an overall about 1.4.
So the water increase is 2%, but the overall bill is 1.39% for a typical single family.
So it is accurate to say the overall increase is 1.39%.
Right. And that's why you have to be careful. So when we make a more streamlined 218, if you only have like a 2-page instead of a 4-page, people are gonna say, oh, you're hiding the information. The last time you gave a lot more detail, and now at the cost of making it more intelligible is people are gonna say you're hiding information. So I don't know if there is a best practice, but what we can do at the workshop, we can bring some examples. We can say, here's what Olivenhain did, here's what Ocean said, whatever. And we're not gonna bring in 24, because that's too hard to digest, but if we can bring in a couple, and the board may say, hey, we like this format of this one, let's go with that.
But I like your idea of simplifying things. So the first page has got to be, you know, the who, what, where. But then the
Because-
second page could be some nice, easy to understand comparison charts. And then all this stuff, which is required, goes here or here. So that they get what needs to be on the
Yeah,
first page
but
and some easy graphs.
And I'm just brainstorming here, but then I don't know if I'm even sold on this, but like, I mean, you know, you could, for every $100, right, it equates, every your bill, it equates to, this amount of increase, right, so, 2.49, right?
Right.
So, you know, maybe, again, I don't know if, I'm spitballing here, I don't know if that's better or more confusing or not, but like, if,
But I don't think you can do that, because if you had a bigger water bill, then the percent increase is gonna be higher than 2.49%.
Right.
Because that fixed sewer is balancing out some of that, but as the water gets bigger and bigger, that sewer just can't do its
Yeah.
job of holding it down anymore.
I gotcha.
So that's why we have to be careful. If we try to
I'm not sure
overly
you're putting that.
simplify it, then it can be misleading to
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
We can say, here's a average user, a below average user, a high volume user, which we've done in the past, to let people put themselves into their own category. Do I use 6 units a month, 13 units, 21 I think it is the next, or am I a hog? I'm
Most of the
42
customers I've
units.
talked to don't even know how many units they use.
Right.
And that's part of adds to the confusion, like they just don't
They
understand
don't
it.
understand what a unit
Yeah.
means.
So, and that's hard to connect those dots. I can't say, here's exactly what it means to you when I don't know what your situation is.
Right.
So these 218 notices are generic in a way,
Sure.
and then you'd like to think that the people can take their reality and this generic piece and say, oh, I fit in category whatever. But I don't know how to do that to help them.
Yeah.
Okay, and go back to showing what our reserves would be under this scenario,
So,
So
what
if
that
you're talking
is.
about which scenario are we looking at?
under the scenario of 2.49%.
okay, this is,
That's the
yes,
full,
that's
yeah.
this.
That's
one,
the
right?
full thing.
Yeah,
That's
Okay,
it.
that's it.
That's it.
So that keeps us at 300 days.
Yep.
Well, except for that
1 year, but
Yeah, 1 year in 2022 would drop down to 293.
Yeah, and I don't think a rating agency is gonna beat you up, cause for 1 year
That's a
you
leap
were.
year.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
it probably is, huh? It is.
so we go to, so what does that give us in reserves above the floor total? What's
So-
the number
Yeah,
before
this
the
is
floor
somewhere
total?
around 20, well,
For combined?
here we're at,
Yeah.
60, almost 60, 59.
yeah, for
Yeah.
110.
It dips down because of our pension payments, but it starts to trim back up after 22.
All right.
Yeah, but so is the ceiling.
Yeah,
So-
but it's trending. I mean,
Yeah.
it'll catch
So
up.
it's about 55, 60 million?
So in the outer years here, we
Yeah.
may have to look at a sewer rate increase potentially, because this one looks like it's kind of trending downwards.
Yeah, cause I think this shows 0% sewer increases for the whole 5 year, right?
Keeps it.
Or was there
Not
some other
positive,
year?
it might be for 3 years.
Okay, and then there was some nominal.
Then there might be some 2% in the 3rd year, I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, I have to look at what we had in there for assumptions.
And again, we're looking at a 2-year.
Well, that's another thing through the process of the cost of service we wanna hear from the board. With what we're talking about right now, and what I said before, that we may want to, take more time to look at the cost of service, we may be just looking for a 1 year. And adopt a new rate in 2020, and then we'll come back in 2021 with the new, more robust cost of service study, which may look at different ways, irrigation rates, pass-through rates, a lot of things we don't do now.
More robust sounds like more expensive.
Well, we already know what the cost of
For
service
somebody.
study costs.
Well, and it'll
What's
probably,
that?
well, the cost service study, we paid $63,000 for it. Now, if we extend that over a longer period of time, it may, come back to the board for an increase on it, but that way we can do the deeper dive and look at all of our options. The committee would be involved every step of the way, of course, and we could see, what you wanna do for January 2021.
And we'd probably be adding maybe like $20,000 to $25,000 to that study.
Yeah.
But you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. It's a good investment.
That's a lot to chew on. What do you need to know by?
Well, we're gonna be reaching out to all of the directors, see if December 9th works for a workshop. We tentatively had a finance committee meeting set that date, so we may wanna combine those, have like a finance committee meeting at 3 and the workshop at 4. Otherwise, we can just punt on the finance committee. So the item that was gonna be on the finance committee meeting that date was a look at the CAFR, or what was that?
Comprehensive annual financial report.
Yeah, it's a financial statement that's gonna be going to the board on December 11th.
11.
So we wanted the
It's a-
finance committee to get a sneak peek look at it. If you don't think it's important to get the sneak peek, we would just do the workshop in lieu of a finance committee meeting, or we could do both of them on the same day.
So it's a robust cost of service and a comprehensive financial report.
You can interchange those,
Yeah.
yeah.
What a
Well, so-
good GM
Yeah.
terminology,
Yeah.
they're just really.
That's actually what it's titled. So
It's all positive stuff.
Just to give you a pre-look at what we're presenting, so you can determine whether or not you want to do the committee. We want to keep the finance committee informed at all times, so we don't bring anything to the board and you're surprised and say we haven't seen that before.
Oh,
So,
you're gonna do, that's a new leaf.
well, yeah,
So-
not for me. Not for me. I've always,
Those aren't lost on
I'm
me.
gonna get that jab, yeah, I know.
So what we're planning on doing, and just so you know, so you can decide if you wanna have the committee meeting on the 9th, on the 10th, or not at all, we took the basic financial statements, which we've been doing forever, and we've actually turned it into a comprehensive annual financial report. That's
Not
the
our title, that's the title.
That's the title that actually we sent, the GFOA gave us for the report. What that entails is you add 2 additional sections to the basic financial statements. There's an introductory section where you tell the history of the district, the directors, the service area, bunch of other stuff like that you discuss. Then you have the basic financial statements is the meat of it. And then at the end is the statistical section, where we go through probably about 20 to 25 different charts with 10 years worth of information. So revenues by source for the last 10 years, expenses by source for the last 10 years, demographics, debt for the last 10 years, rates for the last 10 years. It has all these different charts and graphs that are added to it. There's a 30 to 35, maybe 40 page checklist that you have to go through to add to your financial statements. You submit it to the GFOA and you can win an award. So it's a certificate of excellence in reporting from the GFOA. So we've prepared this new report that we're going to show to you and submit to the GFOA and hope that we win the award.
Yeah. So you guys talk about best practices. That's a best practice in the industry to go to the CAFR. Not everybody, I don't know how many water agencies do it.
A lot of them do it nowadays, but we want to be one of the distinguished districts.
We wanna be that platinum district.
That's right. That's what
So, so that's the purpose of the CAFR on the 11th.
So Libby's going 9% this year?
That's what I've heard.
Again,
Yeah, they just did it, not this past
Is it
Wednesday, it
approved?
was the Wednesday before.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
their
was-
public
it was-
hearing was like I said, not this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before.
they, I think they went out for the cost of service study on March of 2019, and then the rates go into effect. I got it right here.
And they use draft
Um,
plans too.
They just built a brand new building.
Rates will
as
be in
well.
effect March 20th, 2020. And there, just as a comparison, ours is let me just show you real quick. So ours is 128.47. OMWD, same 13 units of water with the sewer, is $140 currently. And they're gonna go up to 146. So it was 9% on the water commodity, but because they're not raising the sewer, it's a 4.5% net
Yeah.
effect. And their RTS isn't going up that much. Our RTS is going up like 4%, but their commodity went up, let me make sure it was about 9%.
Wow, so if you just live a couple, so my boundaries for Division 4 go all the way up into La Costa, Oaks, which is that neighborhood that's,
Yeah.
as you go up the Rancho Santa Fe, but
Across the
you
street.
just cross the street and you're paying
Yeah.
$26 or $20 more a month on
Yeah.
average.
Yeah, but people don't care.
Well, when I'm knocking
Their
on the
commodity
door.
went up
And so when they
9.2.
come and ask you questions, say, go over there and talk to
When
them.
I'm knocking on their door talking to them, they'll know.
And always remember that this board chose to buy desal water, and that's very expensive. So for us to be competitive with our neighbors, I think is a huge testament to this organization. When you look at 25% of our cost of water being twice as much as other people are getting, that's pretty good that we're in the ballpark with that.
And then Oceanside, real quick, is $144.
Wow.
So they're both $20 over us.
Alright, let's, again, not to think of.
I'd like to see, Vista would be important, just they just do water, I understand it.
I'm going to get all of them.
Yeah.
And get Buena Vista, so we
Yeah.
can combine
And
the
get,
two.
you know, and one of the benefits of us kind of being behind timing wise, is that all of these other folks would already be done, right? I remember last time I think we went through this, we were trying to, like, we were looking at where we stood, but where we were gonna go, we didn't know where everybody else was gonna go, so it pushed us up towards, like, above, the halfway line, which we like to be on the bottom. But I'm sure after everybody was done, we were probably closer back down to the bottom third, so.
Yeah, Carlsbad,
I don't have it right now, but those are, yeah.
those would be big ones to get.
Definitely get all the ones around us. I'm going to try to get all 24, but definitely get the ones that
Yeah,
are
the closest
around
ones.
us
That's
first.
what we wanna compare them to.
Yeah, and we tend to look at agencies that are 100% reliant on imported water, because some have their own water source. Like VID is a good example. They have water in Lake Henshaw. We don't have access, so to compare ourselves to VID may or may not be a good
Yeah,
comparison.
but
because
VID has to clean that water up.
They do.
We don't
Right.
have that cost.
Yeah, but it's net cheaper for them to do that than to buy treated water.
Where do they do that treatment, by the way, VID?
I don't know where their treatment plant is.
And last time I drove past Henshaw, there was no water there,
Yeah,
so. Maybe, but it's
But
raining.
it'd be interesting to see, curiosity.
but yeah, we'll look at several North County agencies and have
So,
comparisons.
I know we're gonna have a meeting tomorrow.
Yep.
I'll, sleep on this and give you some more, feedback tomorrow. And then I'll also check, I do have a commitment, a work commitment on the 9th, but I think it's more like in the late afternoon, so, or even evening. So let me find out, and then maybe we could do like an earlier workshop.
That'd be fine,
Yeah.
yeah. Tentatively, we were thinking of 4 o'clock to start the workshop and maybe a finance committee meeting before that, but if we wanna do say a board workshop at 3,
And just, yeah.
we just need to have, if that's what the finance committee suggests, then we can reach out to the rest of the directors and see if they're available at that time. So if it
Yeah.
works for you, we could say 3 o'clock board workshop?
Well, I have to look.
Okay,
See.
you'll get back
Yeah,
with me
yeah.
tomorrow morning, we'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I have one speaker on this item. Let me see who we got here.
Yeah.
Is Mr. Hunsaker still here? Oh, hey, Mr. Hunsaker, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
There's been some discussion about doing some more apartment studies as to the big disparity in the amount of water that they're using, and I'm wondering if there's gonna be any of that factored in. Secondly, electricity's been average about 5% increase
Yeah.
a year, and that goes directly into the cost of water, and particularly for our desal, because it's 2% plus increases in power costs, essentially. So these figures may be misleading the consumer as to what he's likely to actually see.
No, these figures
And I'd
would be
like
what
to-
you see.
This would be what they would see.
This would be the 218 numbers,
Yeah,
that's the way it is.
this would be announced, and we'd
Yeah,
have to,
right.
we'd have to live with these.
But I wanna make sure it's clear that what the history has been. And, that, cause, what people are seeing in their overall bills is higher than this. This is what you're doing, based on your projections and pretty much assuming there's gonna be moderate increases in water and power, which I don't think is gonna be the case. This becomes a big factor when you have a lot of people on fixed income that have to deal with these increases. And increasingly, a lot of mobile home parks which once were using master meters, are using more individual meters. And that is a concern. I would be interested in knowing how much of our revenue is coming from leasing. We have a lease agreement, and we also have an agreement where people can buy a portion of a meter to make up their total capacity needs. And I'm wondering how we recover costs of those partial meters when we only charge per meter. So that's the only comments I'm gonna make tonight now.
Mike, I suspect that you factored in anticipated increases in electricity. You seem like
Yeah,
you're
we
gonna-
have about 8 to 9% built in for electricity increases for the next couple of years.
And the numbers we put in for purchase water costs come from the water authority and their projections, which includes increases in
Yeah.
power costs.
And desal, right?
And then at least if this is what we go with, 2.49%, and we advertise it through the proper channels of the 218, that it is what it is. If we have to go back and change it for some reason down the road, then we'll have to do a whole nother 218, right?
Correct.
So, it is what it is. I have one other speaker, for other business, public comment, oral communications, Mr. Hunsaker. Did you have anything else?
I just wanted to know if you had a chance to talk to council and maybe Best and Krieger about possible 330 implications on fees.
Sure.
Yeah, so we have talked with our council, they're still looking into it, but from a staff level, we looked at it and we think what was being presented is different than our interpretation. A lot of the limitations that you mentioned were on the city side of impact fees, and from the capacity fee, from the utility side, we don't think they pertain.
Right. Now, when we made the change, ordered the change in capacity fees, was that by ordinance?
I'm trying to remember if it was by resolution or an ordinance.
Ordinance that sets the rates.
Ordinance.
Ordinance, yeah, so it was done by
Yeah,
ordinance.
okay, well, that would be a big factor, especially when you got Newland in here, because they were approved for building before your ordinance. And it's saying anything that's been approved is not subject to ordinances afterwards. There's,
They'd be subject to our fees in place at the time that they pull their building permits, so, even though their project may have been approved.
okay, thank you.
Okay, move to adjourn.
Thank you very much.